On the reflecting pond, or the reflecting pool as some people call it, very important to us was the longevity, having it so that it's not closed every day. And all these are, I just had this done. I'm getting a first glimpse, but that's your size so those are among the tallest buildings in the world, including the Empire State Building, World Trade Center, Sears Tower, Chicago. So if you lay it on its side, you take 2 or 3 of them to fill it in, because the width is almost 200 feet wide. And actually much more than 2,000, close to, including everything, it's about 2,500 feet in length to the end. And it's going to be beautiful.
President Trump auditioning to be a general contractor more than commander-in-chief, perhaps. As the war presses on with Iran, the president yesterday gave his own definition of ceasefire, while Secretary of State Marco Rubio was pressed on Capitol Hill about the comment he made Tuesday we told you about yesterday, that the war is over. It all comes as there were 2 significant votes in the House yesterday, one a rare rebuke of President Trump's power, passing a bipartisan measure directing the president to withdraw forces from Iran or to seek congressional approval to extend the war. The other advancing new sanctions on Russia and aid to Ukraine. We'll see where those are headed. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats putting pressure on their Republican colleagues to challenge President Trump's appointment of Bill Pulte as acting director of national intelligence. We'll bring you new reporting on that. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Thursday, June 4th, the morning after the Knicks' huge Game 1 road win in San Antonio in the NBA Finals. With us to celebrate, the co-host of our 9 a.m. hour, staff writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, co-host of The Rest is Politics podcast, the BBC's Caddy K, MS Now contributor Mike Barnacle, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haas, and MS Now senior Capitol Hill reporter, the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale. Good morning to you all. Richard, since we are surrounded by Celtics fans, I have to start with you.
Let's change the booking here, will we, please?
Winning. Number 2, to Richard's point, home court advantage now gone. And this is a young Spurs team. And I will say, they folded down the stretch a little bit last night. And there has been a thought, there's never been a team this young in the finals. So maybe the spotlight's a little too big. And then 3, Mike, the reason why it matters so much is that now the Spurs have to get at least 1 road game.
Yeah.
And I don't know that have ever seen a scene like MSG will be in these finals. This is a crowd that has not had a championship in over 50 years. It is the hottest ticket and toughest ticket arguably New York sports has ever encountered. And especially now that they know if they win their 3 home games, they're the champions.
Yeah.
Like, that's a very tall order for San Antonio.
Well, in addition to all of that, I mean, the president is threatening to show up for Game 3.
Apparently he's going to Game 3.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens then. I tell you what impressed me about the Knicks last night. First of all, Brunson is money. He is money. You put it on the table, he's going to carry your club all the way through, especially in the fourth quarter. The other thing that impressed me was Karl Anthony Towns.
That's right.
I mean, he beat the Mavericks up.
Spurs, yeah.
He was incredible, the Spurs. He beat them up physically. I mean, they couldn't get close to the basket. And I don't know whether they're so young that they're not used to getting pushed around in the court, but he pushed them around in the court. The other big thing, Willie, about the game, at least for me, because he's a friend of mine, there is nothing like watching a basketball game narrated, carried by Mike Breen.
Yeah.
What a great announcer he is.
He's great.
He also calls Knicks games all year, so knows the team so well. Ali Vitale, the pride of Westchester County. I noticed a little blear in your eyes this morning. I share that with you. We were all up late.
I can help Richard Haas here because I am actually a New Yorker who just loves to see New York teams do well. I mean, you guys know by this point, basketball is not my favorite sport. I'm much more into football season. But at the same time, how can you not be excited about the fact that the Knicks are this hot right now? It seems like everyone has a good pep in their step. I even got a New Jersey congresswoman this morning to admit, yeah, I'm here for the Knicks. Why not?
All right, we'll take that. That's all right. Mass celebrations throughout the halls of Congress, I hope. So Game 2 is tomorrow night in San Antonio. Obviously, now that becomes a must-win game for the Spurs. We'll have some full highlights coming up a little bit later. But let's get to our top story. The United States and Iran continuing to give mixed messages on where the war stands. Now in its fourth month, President Trump claimed yesterday negotiations have gone very well, in his words, but Iran said there has not been any significant progress. As the country's foreign minister vowed, any hostile act will be met with an immediate, decisive response. Video of the Iranian drone attack yesterday on Kuwait's main airport shows extensive damage, debris, smoke, flames throughout. That's a passenger terminal. Kuwait says the attack killed one person and wounded dozens others. Meanwhile, Israel and Lebanon announced they have agreed to the implementation of a ceasefire, but it is contingent on a complete cessation of Hezbollah fire and removal of all Hezbollah operatives from southern Iran. That's according to a joint statement from the two nations along with the United States. That agreement depends on the cooperation of Hezbollah, which is not controlled by the Lebanese government and, of course, is aligned with Iran. But it could move a major obstacle for now to peace talks, as Tehran has insisted Lebanon be part of any deal. Israel has continued its attacks in southern Lebanon today, where it maintains a large military presence on the ground. The president was asked yesterday about the state of that ceasefire, given the recent attacks across the Middle East. He did not give a definitive answer, leading to this exchange.
How do you define ceasefire?
Pretty much the way it is. It's a different part of the world. You know, I'd say in that part of the world, ceasefire is when you're shooting in a more moderate manner.
Yesterday you signed, Mr. President.
That's true. I mean, a ceasefire there is much different than a ceasefire in other parts of the world.
So, Katty K, we have a new definition of ceasefire. It's when there's shooting only in a moderate manner, defined by the president himself, when you're not bringing out the big guns, I guess. Of course, this ceasefire that has been in place, we've called it shaky, we've called it fragile. I mean, there are shots, there are live rounds being fired, for the most part, from Iran at our allies across the Gulf states. So what is the state, from your reporting, of these negotiations such that they are to end this war?
Yeah, I suspect if you're sitting in Kuwait this morning, you're not thinking that there is much of a ceasefire going on. Every time I've spoken to leaders and ministers in the Gulf region, they do remind me that they are still under attack, and this ceasefire is a ceasefire in name pretty much only. But it is not full-scale war, and the question is, are we any closer to getting some kind of a deal? After all of the fits and starts that we've had out of the White House, it seems the two big issues that remain are whether the Iranians will have any kind of control of the Strait of Hormuz, and the even bigger issue is what's to be done about Iran's nuclear program. Willie, it still looks like we're at the status quo ante, where before the shooting started on February the 28th, Iran had a nuclear program. It didn't control the Strait of Hormuz, and I think at the moment that's the best that the administration can hope for. Donald Trump seems to be terrified of the O word, the Obama word, anything being compared that he does to the JCPOA, which may be why there's a holdup. It looks like they had got fairly close, but then he got spooked by being criticized for being weak and that this looked too much like the original Iran deal. One member of Congress had told me that the one thing he really doesn't want is pallets of cash going over to the Iranians, and the deal that we were doing looked like there was some kind of cash component to it. So, I mean, who knows where we are? Who knows how close we are? Who knows if they can square these circles? One thing I will say is most of the Iran experts I have spoken to don't set much store by whatever Iran signs when it comes to their nuclear program.
Yeah, I will say a Middle East expert told me yesterday that, frankly, President Trump's definition of a ceasefire for that part of the world, not that far off. So, Richard, let's talk about where things stand. Part of the obstacles, as Katty just said, is President Trump's real hesitation to sign on any sort of agreement that could be remotely compared to what Obama did a decade or so ago. The worried about the cash, worried about JCPOA comparisons, and also his instinct. He knows this war has not gone well. And I have some reporting out in the Atlantic in a brand new story about his impulse. Every time we've gotten close, he tries to make the deal bigger so he can try to sell it as a grand bargain. And there's a really interesting, telling scene in the story about that phone call he had over the weekend, or 10 days ago or so, with some leaders urging them to join the Abraham Accords. Yep. And he was met with such silence, literal silence on the phone, that the President of the United States had to say, "Hi, is anybody there?" He thought the connection dropped because there was such a reluctance for people to do that because of their feelings about Israel right now, et cetera, et cetera. So with that as the backdrop and the violence picking up again this week, what is your sense? What could be a realistic next step to get us a little closer to an agreement? Is there one?
No, it's the same set of issues. And the president balked, as you say, at the deal the other day because he was worried about the criticism he was getting from Republicans for the first time. But there's not going to be a better deal. The idea that you're going to get something happening at the negotiating table that's not going to reflect what's happening on the ground just doesn't happen. That's just not going to happen. The Iranians also, they see the vote in the Congress and all that. Everything they're seeing suggests to them that time is on their side, that they have more endurance, if you will, than we do. So we'll ultimately get there, but it's going to be a very messy situation on the Strait. And even if we get it reopened, no one should think for a second it's going to stay reopened without conditions. The nuclear, at best, you'll get something almost as a prelude to a second JCPOA, some type of a framework deal that places ceilings on Iran's nuclear activities, won't limit them. And then going back to the Lebanon part of the story, you're not going to get a deal that's going to handle lots of the other issues, ballistic missiles, drones, air forces, navies, mining, not to mention support for proxy groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. So this is going to be a very limited agreement at best. And my guess is we'll get there sooner or later. Almost going back to the president's point, it won't be peace. Whatever else we're going to get, it will not be peace. It will be intermittent ceasefires.
So, Richard, what happens now that Iran, on an almost daily basis, is lobbing missiles or drones at various neighboring countries? What happens if one of those missiles, one of those drones lands, explodes, and a member of the American personnel over there, Army, whatever, gets killed?
There's two big triggers here. That's one, where for the president, that might put him under enormous pressure to respond. So that's one where then we would have to attack something with escalate there. The most likely set of targets that we haven't escalated against, the Israelis did once, are the Iranian energy infrastructure. And the reason we haven't done that, Mike, is we don't want the Iranians going full force against the Kuwaiti, Saudi, UAE, Bahraini, Qatari energy infrastructure, because that would take a crisis into a global calamity. But that's the danger right now, that until this is somewhat more nailed down, whether it's intentional or unintentional, I am worried whether it's a scenario like you just suggested, an American soldier gets killed, or some missile hits some new oil refinery, then there's pressure to retaliate against Iran, and Iran then escalates. That's why it's important, that we get to some type of closer to a ceasefire than we are now. Again, we're never going to get to peace, but can we get something more essentially calmer, where the military dimension of this is tamped way down?
Richard mentioned the House yesterday passing a Democratic-led measure to limit President Trump's war powers when it comes to Iran. The resolution passed 215 to 208 with 4 Republicans, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, the outgoing Thomas Massie of Kentucky, Tom Barrett of Michigan, and Warren Davidson of Ohio, crossing party lines and joining all Democrats in voting yes. The legislation requires the president to withdraw U.S. forces from hostilities with Iran or to gain approval from Congress to continue the war. That now heads to the Senate, but even if it were to pass both chambers, it faces headwinds and legal questions, standing for now perhaps as just a symbolic blow to President Trump. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was back on Capitol Hill yesterday, testifying in front of the House Foreign Affairs Committee this time. In an appearance with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee the day before, Secretary Rubio notably said the war is over. Yesterday, he was pressed on that comment. Here first is what he told the Senate on Tuesday, followed by yesterday's exchange with a member of the House.
Rubio, you keep telling us how we're winning this war. The president keeps saying,
well, the war's over
completely annihilated. The war is not over. And yet the American people see how we're losing at the pump and with their costs, and yet this thing still hasn't been resolved. Every day he tweets out, oh, we've obliterated them, we've annihilated them, they're going to surrender, but yet we still find ourselves spending billions of dollars a week.
If the war is over, I have a simple question. Who won?
First of all, Epic Fury is over, which is what you would consider the war. That operation is
So you agree
concluded.
it's a war, then?
No, those are hostilities. They called it a war.
Okay.
I'm just responding to the Senator
Mr. Secretary, you can change the name of the operation. It doesn't change the fact that the Strait is still closed and my service members and all of our service members are still in harm's way. The war is not over.
So, Allie, Secretary Rubio trying to do a little cleanup, perhaps, maybe adding a little caveat to what he had said the day before when he clearly said the war is over. Say, no, it's hostilities and epic fury is over. Maybe a little semantic game there. But clearly they're struggling to answer the question of where this war stands, where it's going, and why they don't have congressional approval, going back to that previous vote I just talked about, for the war.
Yeah, and even Republicans who are supportive of the administration's efforts in Iran have never said that the war is over at this point. So Rubio was out ahead even of them. And look, it's a cheeky question from Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs of California there, trying to build on what the Secretary of State maybe misspoke about or just simply said incorrectly to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But I think Rubio's job on Capitol Hill was just to simply give updates that don't get ahead of the president and still try to paint a somewhat optimistic picture of what this Iran war has accomplished. And one of the things that I thought Democrats were quite deft at doing yesterday was being able to establish the fact that solving for a closed Strait of Hormuz doesn't solve for a problem that existed prior to the war causing it as a problem. And I think that's one of the things that they're trying to focus on, as we are also starting to see now with this war powers resolution, which I think you're right to point out is likely just a messaging exercise. And we'll see what it looks like in the Senate if they take it up. There have been some shifting votes, questions about if this so-called YOLO caucus actually leads to the votes that they would need to pass a resolution like this. But at the same time, it's a messaging exercise, I think, largely because the president could veto it. And then there are legal questions about if it actually has teeth in reigning in the administration. But I think what it does do is actually give us the first tangible sign that the Republican hand-wringing that I and you and all of us have heard behind the scenes about the political and domestic impacts of the Iran war, that those are actually starting to manifest now for elected officials who weren't given a chance to vote for it, but are now potentially trying to give themselves an opportunity to say, all right, we got to rein this in if it's going to continue.
Congress at least trying to assert its power to support or not the president going to war. Everybody stay put. We're going to talk much more about this. Also, what we're learning this morning about President Trump's plan to nominate Todd Blanche for Attorney General, his personal attorney, on a permanent basis now. Plus, the president still in favor of that so-called anti-weaponization fund that reportedly had been abandoned. We'll show you his new comments on that. As we go to break, a quick look at the traveler's forecast this morning from AccuWeather's Bernie Rayno. Bernie, how's it looking out there?
Willie, it's warm, dry, and bright from the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic into the Northeast. Your exclusive AccuWeather forecast today, 88 in Boston, 87 New York City. How about 90 in Washington, D.C.? Thunderstorms today, though. Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Dallas toward Houston. There'll be travel delays. Spotty thunderstorm in Miami. But it's a beautiful day in Nashville, Atlanta, and Charlotte. Your exclusive AccuWeather travel forecast, just delays in Miami this afternoon. To help you make the best.
Live picture of the White House, 6:24 on this Thursday morning. President Trump is refusing to confirm that the $1.776 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund really has been scrapped, has been reported. That's the money that was intended to compensate people who claim they were victims of unfair prosecution by the government, including potentially January 6th insurrectionists who attacked police and were convicted by juries of their peers. Here's some of what the president told reporters yesterday in the Oval Office.
Is the $1.8 billion DOJ fund dead or is it on hold?
It's, I'd have to ask the lawyers. I don't know. I know one thing, the weaponization. Are you talking about the weaponization fund?
Yeah, what's your decision?
The weaponization fund, as far as I'm concerned, was a beautiful thing. It was something I didn't make it, but I heard that. I thought that was the greatest thing because people like you have abused our people so badly.
Those comments come just days after a White House source told MS Now the president planned to abandon that fund amid escalating bipartisan backlash. That comes as President Trump is expected in the coming days to nominate Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to serve in the role permanently. That is according to a senior administration official speaking to MS Now. In April, Trump appointed Blanche, his former personal attorney, to lead the DOJ in an acting capacity after firing then Attorney General Pam Bondi. Blanche, as I said, previously served as the personal attorney to the president. Here's what Trump said yesterday during an interview with the New York Post.
Will he be Attorney General, or have you decided?
I think you will, yeah.
You haven't got someone else in mind?
No.
Not Ron DeSantis?
I wanted to see how he's received. You know, we put him as acting, and he's done a very good job.
Blanche's nomination to be Attorney General, two senior administration officials told MS Now, saying Blanche has developed good relationships with Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill that might help to allay some confirmation issues he inevitably will face. Ultimately, they said his confirmation may hinge on whether or not that so-called anti-weaponization fund is actually dropped. So Ali Vitale, this guy obviously has the support personally of the President of the United States, was his personal attorney. It feels unlikely that Senate Republicans, unless they suddenly find their courage, will vote against him. So is Todd Blanche going to be the next Attorney General?
It's going to be a bumpy road to get there. I agree with you that it's probably going to end up in that place. But this idea of the DOJ, so-called weaponization fund is really an own goal by the administration. It's a phrase that I keep hearing from Republicans who really seem to be twisting themselves in knots, trying to say, no, we've been assured that the fund is going away. They won't say when I've asked them who is giving them those assurances, but at the same time, they're doing a lot to try to say that it's not going anywhere and that it's actually on hold permanently. Enter then President Trump saying that it's on hold for now or that he loves the idea of it. It all just further muddies the waters for the guy that he himself wants to confirm to be his to be his permanent attorney general. I think one of the things that could end up being instructive today is as the Senate embarks on this budget reconciliation process, they have to go through something we call vote-a-rama, which sounds fun, but is actually a very lengthy process of amendments. Both parties get to offer them. And the first thing that Chuck Schumer is going to offer is an amendment that would kill the DOJ slush fund. It would only take 50 votes to do it. I'm interested if it's that amendment vote or other amendment votes that actually are the Senate offering a legislative rebuke of this DOJ fund, because Bill Cassidy and Tom Tillis both also have amendments. They are part of that so-called YOLO caucus that we were talking about of Republicans who won't be back in the Senate, either because Trump backed a primary challenger to them or because they themselves decided to retire. And so I think that could end up being instructive. And I think the open question is, if the Senate does move on something like that, how does the White House respond, and why President Trump continues to keep this fund alive when really I think it's been well communicated to the White House from public comments from senators, privately to Todd Blanche in a lunch that seemed off the rails a few weeks ago, and then certainly by the Speaker of the House, that the fund has no fans on the Hill.
Yeah, Ali, you and I, of course, have covered Donald Trump for a long time, and we know that he can never admit a defeat. So it's possible his remarks yesterday were just to cover the fact, like, oh, maybe we should keep it going, when actually he knows it's not going anywhere and they'll let it go. But we'll see, because sometimes he does double down on lost causes because he demands pure loyalty from Republicans. But Caddy, this is no sure thing here. To Ali's point, he does now have some pushback in the Republican Senate. It's not going to call it a full-fledged revolt, but there's, whether it's a handful of moderates like Murkowski or Collins, a few people who are leaving who are willing to defy him. McConnell was already there, and now we're seeing Tillis, Cornyn, Cassidy. The numbers are there where a confirmation for anyone is not a sure thing. I think certainly Blanche is seen by most Republicans as an acceptable option, so maybe he squeaks by. But I do think writ large, we're going to see Trump, A, have trouble getting confirmations through, but B, more and more moments where Republicans are willing to pick their spots and say no.
I mean, to be fair on the Republicans finding their spine, to some extent, the courts had already done the heavy lifting for them, so they found their spine after the battle had been won to some extent. But look, there's an argument to be made that Donald Trump doesn't mind having people in an acting capacity. This makes it the kind of apprentice-style version of Capitol Hill anyway. If somebody has not been Senate confirmed, they are entirely in his pocket. He feels that it's that way. He can keep them on their toes. He can play people off against each other. He gets them in for 210 days or whatever it is anyway, and maybe that is long enough. Perhaps he doesn't. I think particularly somebody like Pulte, the chances of him getting confirmed are much less than somebody like Todd Blanche. But I wouldn't necessarily see that as a huge loss to Donald Trump. In his way, I mean, as one Trump advisor said to me recently, he likes having scorpions in a bottle. this increases the idea that the Scorpions are fighting it out in the bottle if they haven't got their positions in as solid a way as they would do if they'd been through a Senate confirmation.
Caddy, stay with us. Ali Vitale, go rest up. We need you strong for Game 2. The host of Way Too Early, MS Now Capitol Hill reporter Ali, thanks so much. Still ahead, while the Trump administration tries to convince Americans the economy is in good shape, new numbers show, again, most Americans disagree. Steve Ratner standing by with his charts straight ahead on Morning Joe. With affordability a top concern, of course, for many, many Americans, new numbers reveal more people are digging into their savings and falling behind on low payments as they try to keep up. Let's bring in former Treasury official, Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner back with charts this morning, looking at how Americans are trying to navigate all of this. Steve, good morning. So let's just start by setting the stage. As you say, American savings really under pressure right now.
Yeah, Willie, look, savings is obviously of critical importance to Americans. It's how you pay for future obligations, education, houses, whatever. And so let's look at what's been happening to the savings rates of Americans as they face this affordability problem, the pressure of inflation on their ability to maintain their living standards and so forth. So this is personal savings rate, how much of people's after-tax income they put away for these other kinds of expenses that may come along. Back in the 1970s, it averaged 12.2% of after-tax income. In the 90s, 7.2%. In the 2000s, 4.2%. And now, after a steady decline, we are at 2.6%. So Americans are at pretty rock bottom of the amount they're willing to save. Another way to measure how stretched consumers' bank accounts and what we call their balance sheet, their savings and their liabilities are, is to look at emergency savings, whether people are better or worse off to meet an emergency need for cash. And so over the past year, 21% have said they have more emergency savings, just 21%. But 29% have said they have less, 22% say they have about the same, and 17% say they have no savings at all. So only 21% of Americans, out of 100% obviously, say they are better positioned to meet an emergency need for cash than they were a year ago.
So in these desperate times, Steve, your next chart reveals that people are taking desperate measures, including being willing to pay penalties for hardship withdrawals from their 401k.
Yeah, you can take money out of your 401k. You pay penalties, you pay taxes. And obviously you deplete your savings. It's not something you want to do. So Vanguard has some numbers showing what's been happening. It's more than the percentage of Americans taking money out of their 401ks has more than tripled since 2020. Still a relatively low number, but it's gone all the way from 1.7 to 6% as people have had to grapple with the effects of inflation, again, on their ability to maintain their living standards. Another thing to look at are mortgage delinquencies. And this is an interesting one because we can separate this one by income. And so using zip codes, people in the lowest income zip codes, you can see that mortgage delinquencies have gone all the way up to almost 30%. And they started, 3.5%. And they started over here, and they went down, down, down during the pandemic when we had a pause on delinquencies, and now they've soared all the way back up. And then as you go to more wealthy zip codes, you can see that the delinquencies drop because people are better off. So this shows very clearly that this kind of pressure that we're looking at on savings exists more heavily in the lower incomes, not surprisingly, than it does for those closer to the top.
And Steve, let's move to your third chart where you reveal that it's not just mortgage payments delinquencies, but there are others across all sorts of loans.
Yeah, this financial stress that I'm talking about on people's ability to make ends meet extends to other forms of debt. So let's take credit card debt. This is the one that people tend to fall into delinquencies 90 days or more, the easiest. And you can see that back here, around in 2009, this is the financial crisis, it got up to 14%. And you can see here it's almost back to where it was before. Student loans are interesting. We've talked, I'm sure everybody's heard a lot about student loan defaults, people who borrow for their education and then can't deal with it. We did have this moratorium during COVID, as I mentioned, but as soon as it came off, student loan delinquencies soared all the way back to where they were essentially before then. Another interesting one is autos. because auto loan delinquencies during the financial crisis actually didn't go up as much as it did for other kinds of debt. And then it came down, but now it is back to actually slightly above where it was at the time of the financial crisis. So for the first time, people tend not to want to be delinquent on their autos because they needed to get to work and to get around their cities and towns, but auto delinquencies have come back up. This is also an interesting way to look at it. So student loan defaults and how it affects other debt. If you go back over here, pre-pandemic, the percentage of people who were in default on their credit cards or in arrears on their credit cards was relatively low. Then we had the various relief measures during COVID. But as soon as the student debt obligations came back into play, the default rates on other delinquency rates on other forms of debt shot up. This is credit cards, and this is auto loans, and this is mortgages. So when you have this problem of high student loan payments, it does affect your ability to stay current on your other obligations. And as you can see, you get very, very high delinquency rates on the part of people who are also behind on their student loans.
Steve, if you put some of your charts and the information on the charts together, especially the emergency savings chart and this last chart that you're looking at right now, the idea that people, when they're strapped for money in terms of purchasing whatever items we can consider, they use a credit card rather than cash because they don't have the cash. What's going to be the short-term impact of all of that credit card debt that they're piling up?
Yeah, it's a huge problem because at some point the chickens come home to roost, and at some point they do have to cut back on their spending, or they can declare personal bankruptcy, although nobody really should want to do that. Few people actually do it. But it essentially puts them in a financial vice where they have less and less then to spend on their current needs. So far they've been kind of tap dancing and doing all the things I showed you to be able to maintain some semblance of their lifestyle. But these pressures appear at the moment with inflation where it is and incomes where they are. People are still losing ground relative to inflation. And so this is going to put more and more pressure, and eventually they're going to have to cut back on their lifestyles, and that's going to be terrible for them and bad for the economy as well.
Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Ratner back with his charts this morning. Steve, thanks so much as always. Still ahead, Democratic leaders are threatening Republicans with an ultimatum on president.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत ही दर्द भरता है मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मका तू लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ हो जहां होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर साए मेरे तन्हा सफर बस रह गया दर्द का असर